History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes with terrifying precision. And there's one pattern that appears again and again throughout human civilization. A pattern so consistent that once you see it, you'll never look at modern economics the same way again. 3 of the most powerful empires in recorded history didn't fall to foreign armies. They weren't conquered by superior forces. They weren't overthrown by revolutions. They destroyed themselves from within through the same economic mechanism, the systematic destruction of their own money. The Roman Empire dominated the Mediterranean world for half a millennium before its currency turned to dust. The Spanish Empire controlled the largest gold reserves ever assembled, yet went bankrupt over and over until it faded into obscurity. The British Empire ruled a quarter of the planet but lost everything within 3 decades when its monetary system failed. 3 empires, 3 centuries, 3 identical failures. The sequence is always the same: imperial expansion, spending beyond means, monetary manipulation, price explosions, trust evaporates, total collapse. And here's what should keep you up at night in 2025. The United States is checking every single box on this list. Every warning indicator that preceded those 3 collapses is flashing red right now. The question isn't if this pattern will play out again. History says it will. The question is, how far along are we? Are we in the early stages, halfway through, or approaching the final act? Welcome to Histo Rewind, where we rewind history to understand our present. This is how empires commit economic suicide, how it's happened 3 times before, and why all signs point to it happening again. Let's rewind to the Roman Empire. For over 500 years, Rome was the superpower of the ancient world. They controlled 60 million subjects across 3 continents. Their legions were unstoppable. Their roads connected civilizations. Their engineering was unmatched, and backing all of this power was their currency, the denarius. Introduced in 201 BC, this silver coin was the dollar of its day. It contained roughly 4.5 grams of pure silver. For centuries, Romans knew that when they held a denarius, they held real value, pure metal, reliable weight, consistent purity. This reliability created something invaluable: trust. And trust allowed Rome to expand, pay massive armies, and construct monuments that still stand today. But here's the problem with empires: they're expensive, incredibly expensive. Every generation, Rome pushed its borders further. Every new province required garrisons, fortifications, administration, supply lines. The costs multiplied exponentially. Eventually, Rome faced a problem every empire eventually faces. Their expenses exceeded their income, so they made a choice. The same choice every empire makes when the bills come due. They started tampering with the money. Emperor Nero, who ruled from 54 to 68 AD, began the slow destruction. He needed funds for his extravagant projects and military operations. His solution? Reduce the silver content of the denarius from pure silver to 90% silver. A 10% cut doesn't sound catastrophic, right? But here's what it meant. Nero could create 11 coins from the same silver that previously made 10. Same amount of precious metal, but more coins chasing the same goods. That's the fundamental mechanism of inflation. But 90% silver still represented real value. The true devastation unfolded over the next 2 centuries. By 211 AD, under Emperor Caracalla, the denarius contained only 50% silver. Half real value, half cheap metal. By 265 AD, under Emperor Gallienus, it had plummeted to just 5% silver, essentially worthless base metal with a silver wash. Stop and think about what this means for an ordinary person. If you were a Roman legionnaire in 265 AD, your pay in denarii had 1/20th the purchasing power it had 2 centuries earlier. The government insisted nothing had changed. The coins still bore the emperor's image. They still called them denarii, but the economic reality was devastating. Prices didn't just rise, they exploded. Historians estimate what cost 1 denarius in 200 AD required 50 denarii by 300 AD. A 50-fold price increase in 1 century. The consequences cascaded through society. Farmers refused to sell crops for worthless coins. They demanded barter or gold. Soldiers stopped fighting for debased currency. They wanted payment in goods or precious metals. Tax collection became impossible. Why accept payment in coins nobody trusted? The entire monetary economy ground to a halt. And here's the critical point. This wasn't caused by barbarian invasions. Rome's borders remained defended. This wasn't caused by disease or natural disaster. This was entirely self-inflicted. The Roman government deliberately destroyed its own currency to finance expenditures it couldn't afford through normal taxation. And when the currency died, the empire's infrastructure collapsed with it. By 476 AD, the Western Roman Empire officially ended. Not because Germanic tribes were militarily superior, but because Rome could no longer pay its armies, couldn't fund its bureaucracy, couldn't maintain its roads and aqueducts. The currency had been debased into irrelevance, and everything built on that currency crumbled. The pattern was established: military overreach, unsustainable expenses, currency debasement, inflation, economic paralysis. Collapse. Rome proved the pattern exists. Every empire since has repeated it. Fast forward 12 centuries. Spain, in the 1500s, is beginning what historians call its golden age. Columbus has reached the Americas. Cortez has toppled the Aztec Empire. Pizarro has conquered the Incas. Spain now controls territories richer than anything Europe has ever seen. In 1545, Spanish conquistadors discovered Cerro Rico, the rich mountain in Potosi in modern-day Bolivia. This wasn't just a silver mine. It was the largest silver deposit humanity had ever found. For the next 100 years, Potosi would produce almost half the world's silver, millions of pounds of it. Treasure fleets crossed the Atlantic, filling Spanish vaults with wealth that seemed limitless. Spain minted this flood of silver into coins. The Spanish dollar became the world's first truly global currency. From Europe to Asia, from the Mediterranean to the Pacific, Spanish silver was accepted, trusted, and desired. Spain became the wealthiest empire on earth. At its height, Spanish territory existed on every inhabited continent. Their saying was literal. The sun never set on Spanish holdings. And then, just like Rome before them, they destroyed themselves. Because money has a paradox built into it. Having more money doesn't make you wealthier if everyone has more money. When Spain flooded Europe with silver, something predictable happened. Prices rose. What cost one silver coin in 1500 cost 10 coins by 1600. The silver hadn't become impure. There was simply vastly more of it flooding the market. Classic inflation. But Spain's problem was even deeper. They weren't producing anything. No manufacturing. No innovation. No industries. They were simply extracting wealth from conquered territories and spending it on wars, palaces, luxury imports from other nations. The silver flowed in from the Americas and immediately flowed back out to France, England, and the Netherlands to pay for goods Spain didn't manufacture themselves. By the late 1500s, Spanish monarchs were drowning in debt. King Philip II, who ruled from 1556 to 1598, inherited enormous debts from his father Charles the Thirst, 36 million ducats. Rather than reduce spending, Philip borrowed more. He waged wars on multiple fronts, against the Ottoman Empire, against Protestant rebels in the Netherlands, against England. When the debts became unpayable, he did something unprecedented. In 1557, Philip II declared bankruptcy. He suspended all debt payments. This was the first sovereign default in modern European history, but it wasn't the last. Spain defaulted again in 1560, again in 1575, again in 1596, 4 bankruptcies in 40 years. Think about that. Despite controlling half the world's silver production, Spain couldn't pay its debts. Each default shattered trust. Lenders refused new loans. Interest rates on Spanish debt skyrocketed. The government's response? Debased the currency further. They minted coins with less silver content. They introduced copper coins they claimed were worth as much as silver. Nobody believed it. The currency lost all credibility. By the 1600s, Spain entered terminal decline. Military operations couldn't be funded. Colonies began breaking away. When the 30 Years' War ended in 1648 with the Peace of Westphalia, Spain's era as a superpower was effectively over. By 1700, the Spanish Empire was finished. The nation that once controlled the world's wealth had spent and borrowed itself into irrelevance. The pattern again, massive resource influx, government overspending, excessive debt, currency inflation, repeated defaults, loss of confidence, collapse. Spain proved that even unlimited resources can't save an empire from fiscal incompetence. Now we rewind to Britain, the empire that lasted longer, stretched farther, and controlled more wealth than Rome or Spain combined. At its peak in 1922, the British Empire governed 458 million people, 1/4 of Earth's population, controlling 1/4 of Earth's land. The phrase, "the sun never sets on the British Empire," wasn't poetic. It was geographical fact. Britain controlled so much territory across time zones that somewhere in their empire it was always daylight. The foundation of this power was the British pound sterling. For over 2 centuries, the pound was the world's reserve currency. More than 60% of global trade was denominated in pounds. The gold standard anchored everything. 1 pound could be exchanged for a fixed quantity of gold. This created stability, trust, and economic dominance. But empires are built on credit. And credit must be repaid. Britain financed its empire through borrowing. Government bonds, war debts, colonial infrastructure, administrative costs. As long as the pound maintained its value, the system worked. Then World War I erupted. In 1914, Britain's national debt stood at £650 million. By 1919, after 4 years of industrial-scale warfare, it had exploded to over £7 billion, a tenfold increase in 5 years. To finance the war, Britain borrowed from everyone, its own citizens, the United States, anyone who would lend. But the war also forced a critical change. Britain suspended the gold standard. In 1914, gold convertibility stopped. They had to print money to fund the war effort. The pound became a fiat currency, backed not by gold but by government promises. After the war, Britain attempted to return to gold. In 1925, Winston Churchill, then Chancellor of the Exchequer, restored the gold standard at the pre-war exchange rate. This decision was catastrophic. The pound was overvalued. British exports became uncompetitive globally. Unemployment soared. The government had to maintain punishingly high interest rates to defend the currency, which strangled economic growth. By 1931, Britain was forced off gold permanently. The pound was devalued. Trust in British currency began eroding, but the real destruction came after World War II. Britain entered that war already heavily indebted. The war consumed everything. By 1945, Britain's national debt reached 270% of GDP. The empire had bankrupted itself to achieve victory. Cities lay in ruins. The economy was shattered, and Britain owed massive debts to the United States. In 1944, while the war still raged, the Bretton Woods Conference restructured the global financial system. The British pound was officially replaced as the world's primary reserve currency. The US dollar took its place. Britain fought desperately to preserve the pound's status. But it was finished. They had the debt, but lacked the gold or economic strength to back their currency. What followed was a slow, humiliating decline. In 1947, Britain tried to make the pound convertible again. The experiment lasted 6 weeks before a currency run forced them to reimpose controls. In 1949, the pound was devalued by 30%. In 1967, it was devalued again. Each devaluation destroyed savings, crushed confidence, and signaled to the world that Britain was no longer a first-tier power. Meanwhile, the empire disintegrated. India gained independence in 1947. Egypt nationalized the Suez Canal in 1956. And Britain's military response was a humiliating failure. Colony after colony broke away, not because they were conquered, but because Britain could no longer afford to maintain them. By the 1970s, Britain teetered on the edge of becoming a failed state. Inflation hit 25%. The government begged the IMF for a bailout. The pound, once the world's reserve currency, became a symbol of decline. The empire that controlled a quarter of the earth lost it all within 30 years, not through military defeat, through currency collapse and debt. The pattern repeated: war debt, currency debasement, loss of reserve status, devaluation, inflation, imperial collapse. Britain proved that even the strongest empire can fall within a single generation when its currency fails. Which brings us to now. The United States, the current empire, the current reserve currency, and every single warning sign that destroyed Rome, Spain, and Britain is flashing red. Let's start with the currency. The US dollar has been the world's reserve currency since 1944. After World War II, the Bretton Woods system established the dollar as the global standard. It was backed by gold at $35 per ounce. Other nations pegged their currencies to the dollar. The dollar was as good as gold, literally. But just like Rome, just like Britain, the United States began spending more than it had. The Vietnam War, Great Society programs, military bases worldwide. By the 1960s, foreign governments noticed America was printing more dollars than it had gold to back them. France, under Charles de Gaulle, began demanding gold in exchange for dollars. Other nations followed. Gold was leaving Fort Knox. The bluff was being called. In 1971, President Nixon closed the gold window. No more gold backing. The dollar became a pure fiat currency, just like the debased Roman denarius, just like the pound after 1931, backed by nothing except trust and government promises. Initially, it seemed manageable. The petrodollar system established in the 1970s created artificial demand because oil was priced globally in dollars, but the spending never stopped. The debt kept growing. In 1980, U.S. national debt was $900 billion. By 2000, $5.6 trillion. By 2020, $27 trillion. Today in 2025, over $36 trillion. That's a 40-fold increase in 45 years. And it's accelerating. But debt is only part of the story. Like Rome debasing the denarius, like Spain flooding Europe with silver, the United States is printing money. Since 2008, the Federal Reserve has created trillions of dollars from nothing. Quantitative easing, they call it, necessary to stabilize the economy. During COVID, they printed over $4 trillion in 2 years, more money created than in the previous century combined. And just like every empire before, they insisted it wouldn't cause inflation, that modern economics had solved the old problems, that we were different. We're not. Inflation hit 9% in 2022. Real inflation, the prices you actually pay for food, housing, healthcare, is far higher. The dollar is being debased, slowly at first, but the pattern always accelerates. And just like Britain, the United States is losing reserve currency status. In 2000, over 70% of global reserves were held in dollars. Today, 58% and falling. The BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, plus new members, are actively building alternatives. They're trading in local currencies, creating new payment systems, reducing dollar dependence. China and Russia are aggressively accumulating gold. Central banks worldwide are diversifying away from dollars. The world is preparing for the dollar to lose. Dominance, just like they prepared for the pound's fall. The pattern is unmistakable. And here's the most dangerous parallel. The United States has the same problem Rome had, military overextension. The US maintains nearly 800 military bases across over 70 countries. The defense budget exceeds $800 billion annually. Wars in Iraq and Afghanistan cost over $8 trillion. The empire is expensive. And it's being funded with debt and printed money. Just like Rome couldn't pay its legions with debased coins, just like Spain couldn't fund its military after repeated defaults, just like Britain couldn't maintain its empire after currency collapse. The United States is running out of time. Let's identify the pattern clearly, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. Every empire that has collapsed economically followed the same sequence. Not similar, identical. Stage 1. Dominance. The empire is at its peak. Military supremacy, economic power. Currency trust. Rome, with the denarius Spain, with the silver dollar Britain, with the pound America, with the dollar at this stage. The currency is backed by something real. Gold, silver, or trust built over generations. The empire seems invincible. Stage 2. Overextension. The empire expands beyond its means. More territory, more military commitments, more promises to citizens. Rome expanded across 3 continents. Spain tried to control every ocean. Britain colonized a quarter of the world. America maintains bases on every continent. The costs become unsustainable. Stage 3. Deficit spending. The empire spends more than it earns. Initially manageable through borrowing, issuing bonds, promising repayment, but deficits become structural, permanent. Rome needed to pay legions, Spain needed to fund wars, Britain needed to finance world wars. America runs trillion-dollar deficits annually, even during economic growth. Stage 4, currency debasement. The empire can't borrow enough, can't tax enough, so they debase the currency. Rome reduced silver content in denarii. Spain flooded markets with silver. Causing inflation, Britain abandoned gold and devalued the pound twice. America left gold in 1971 and has been printing ever since. Stage 5. Inflation. More currency with the same amount of real goods means prices rise. Rome saw prices increase. 50-fold Spain experienced price inflation across Europe. Britain saw 25% inflation in the 1970s. America is experiencing inflation now despite government claims it's transitory. Stage 6. Loss of confidence. The domestic population and foreign nations lose trust in the currency. Roman soldiers demanded payment in gold. Not denarius. Spanish creditors refused lending after multiple defaults. The world shifted from pounds to dollars at Bretton Woods today. Nations are shifting away from the dollar. Stage 7. Collapse. The economic system fails. The currency becomes worthless or loses dominance. The empire can't fund its military, can't maintain control. Rome fell because it couldn't pay armies. Spain declined into irrelevance. Britain lost its empire within decades. And the US? We're living through the answer right now. That's the pattern. 7 stages repeated across 2,000 years of history. Different empires, different continents, different currencies, but the exact same sequence, because the mathematics don't change. You cannot spend more than you earn forever. You cannot print prosperity. You cannot debase your currency without consequences. The pattern is absolute, and we're currently in stage 5, heading rapidly towards stage 6. So what comes next? History offers 3 possible outcomes. Option 1, controlled decline like Britain after 1945. They lost the empire, lost reserve currency status, experienced painful devaluation and inflation, but the nation didn't disappear. It adjusted to being a second-tier power. A slow, humiliating decline, but not total collapse. Option 2, chaotic collapse like Rome in the 5th century. The currency becomes worthless. The government loses control. The empire fragments. Dark Ages follow. This is the worst-case scenario. Complete systemic breakdown, not just economic, but social and political. Option 3, reset and restructure. A new currency system is established, maybe backed by gold again. Maybe a new reserve currency emerges. China's yuan, a basket of currencies, digital currencies. The old system dies, but something new replaces it relatively quickly. Painful, but survivable. The United States stands at this crossroads. The debt cannot be repaid. Not at current levels. Not with current spending. The only options are default. Inflation or restructuring. Default would destroy dollar hegemony instantly. Inflation is already happening and will likely accelerate. Restructuring requires political will that doesn't currently exist. And here's what makes this different from Rome, Spain, or Britain. Those were regional empires. The US dollar is the global reserve currency. When the Roman denarius collapsed, it affected the Roman Empire. When the dollar collapses, it affects the entire world. Every central bank, every trade agreement, every financial market. The interconnected global economy amplifies both the impact and the chaos, but the pattern says it's coming. Not because of prediction, because of precedent. 4 empires, 4 currency collapses, 4 identical sequences. The mathematics of empire are unforgiving. You can delay it, you can deny it, but you cannot avoid it. Rome debased its currency to pay legions. The denarius died. The empire fell. Spain flooded the world with silver. Inflation destroyed its wealth. The empire declined. Britain borrowed to fight 2 world wars. The pound collapsed. The empire dissolved. And now the United States prints trillions, runs endless deficits, and believes it's different. It's not different. The pattern doesn't care about American exceptionalism. It doesn't care about military strength or technological advancement. The pattern is economic. And economic laws are as absolute as physical laws. You cannot print wealth. You cannot borrow forever. You cannot debase your currency without destroying your empire. 4 empires. 4 collapses. 4 identical patterns. The only question is timing. How long until stage 6? How long until the world loses confidence in the dollar? How long until the American empire follows Rome, Spain, and Britain into the history books? The pattern says we're close. The debt says we're close. The money printing says we're close. And history, which has watched this exact sequence destroy 4 empires before, says the ending is inevitable. The only variables are how fast it happens and how painful it becomes. This is History Rewind. We rewind history to understand our present. If this gave you a new perspective on where we're headed, subscribe. Because when the pattern completes, you'll want to understand what happened and why. History has the answers, and the pattern never lies.